This is a hard video for me to make today. In fact, it's been hard for me to get into the mood to make content at all in the last few days. The sudden, unexpected, and still a little bit mysterious, we don't even know all the details yet, death of Yu-Gi-Oh! Author Kazuki Takahashi. It hit me harder than I would have expected it to. And I would have expected it to hit me pretty hard anyway. He seemed like such a cool person. Not perfect, nobody's perfect. But such a creative writer. And someone who just loved having fun with other people. He loved games so much. And I adored the way he wrote his characters and his world. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so absurd. And yet, the way he writes every one of his characters to just take it at face value, it feels believable. And I've always tried to write that way. I've always tried to write in a way that even my more insane concepts feel believable. And you'll see that if you read any of my books. At least I hope. I hope I've managed to pull that off. Because that is a thing that I took from this man's legacy. I only got into writing in the first place because I wrote Yu-Gi-Oh! Fanfiction. I wouldn't recommend reading it. And I aped a lot of the plots for my novels anyway. But it's a big reason for me being who I am today. It's tragic, and I have been grieving for days, but I honestly believe that Kazuki Takahashi is one of those people who would want us to remember the good things about them rather than spend time grieving about the loss. As someone who would want us to celebrate his life rather than lose time grieving it. So I feel like the only video I can make right now to get myself out of my funk is a Yu-Gi-Oh! Video. Specifically about one of the, I think, cleverer little story arcs within the greater Duelist Kingdom arc. And it just so happens that that's exactly where we left off last time, several months ago. I didn't realize it had been that long. I need to do these more often. But we're picking up with chapters 33 through 40. This is the duel against the Labyrinth brothers, the Make-You brothers. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the duel itself, on the specific details of it, but I am going to talk about how it's handled, how it's framed, because I think it's just so brilliant. Everything about it is perfect, except how para and docs, as they're called in the dub, how they rhyme in the dub. Which is so dumb that it almost wraps around to being cool again. Kind of like The Room. And like, admittedly, maybe in the Japanese version, they rhymed. And it just doesn't rhyme anymore when you translate it outright for like the English manga release. But I cannot bring myself to believe that 4Kids of all companies would have gone out of its way and made more work for themselves to be true to the original, so I assume that they didn't rhyme in the original. Now, these chapters start out with a resolution to the previous story. We get a little verbal sparring between Bandit Keith and Jinochi, where Jinochi calls him out for being a cheater, which is great, because I mentioned in the previous review, Keith and Jinochi feel like parallels to each other. Like, Keith is the kind of character that Jinochi could be without his friends to make him a better person. And so having him call out Keith, challenging him to fight his next battle honorably, only for Keith to brush him off, is, I think, exactly the kind of interaction that these characters would and should have with each other. Especially considering that Jinochi is going to be the one to knock him out of the finals. Spoiler alert. But that does happen. And he does so. Like, he uses tricky methods in the duel itself, but he does so honorably. whereas Keith tries to take Jinochi out without even having to fight him. And while, yeah, Keith is right to a point, the battle against your opponent in a card game does start before the game ever starts. Like, I don't know this so much from Yu-Gi-Oh, but like, I play Pokemon pretty regularly online, and I'm pretty good at it, and that's because I do my best to try to consider what my opponent might use against me and counter it before I even start playing the game. But you're not supposed to, like, try to keep your opponent from playing at all. That's taking things too far. As is, after they run off, Keith and his guys pushing a boulder in front of the entrance to this cave, which, at least in the manga, it does look like a boulder. In the anime, it looks like
they'll never be able to get past this cardboard cutout of a boulder. It's no use, it's made of solid cardboard.
Like, he traps them in there, not knowing that there's another way out, expecting that they're just gonna starve and die. This guy's a monster, and that is taking things too far, even for a game that's played as seriously as Duel Monsters is in universe. And then he proves himself to be an asshole all over again by doing that thing that his inner dialogue implied he would do in the last story, beating the crap out of his friends and taking all of their star chips, equaling the 10 that he needs to get into the castle. And then he leaves them behind too. It's just absolutely gross. He's such a gross character, and it's so satisfying to see him get his comeuppance later. And yet, a testament to what I was talking about earlier, he doesn't feel out of place in this world, and in fact feels tame compared to some of the other villains. And it's that unique balance of more down-to-earth, realistic villains, kind of mid-tier, ridiculous villains, and then the really absurd, super rich ones that helps this world feel real, even when it's being absolutely ridiculous. Fortunately for Yugi and his friends, though, they find another passage deeper into the cave, where the walls start to change and look more man-made. And we get a cool overhead shot that, as far as I recall, wasn't in the anime, where we see the corridors that they're traversing without the ceiling, and it's a maze. It's a maze with only, like, one real path through, but it's a maze nonetheless. And it leads to the chamber where the Mayhew brothers have their unique duel field set up, where they could play the Labyrinth wall card and turn the game board into a labyrinth, where monsters have to move through to the other side in order to reach the opponent and damage them. You could still damage them in battle, but the implication is that you could, like, damage them directly, or that reaching the other end lets you pick a door, because the main goal of this game is to pick a door and hope it's the right one that'll lead you out. It's a little clear what the specific win condition is here. But the point is, the Labyrinth doesn't allow you to just do it. But the real purpose of the Labyrinth here is that, of course, May and Q have decks stacked entirely with cards that work in unique ways with the Labyrinth, treating it like a field spell, effectively allowing them to block paths or change the paths that their enemies are going down at will, set traps that their enemies can't predict, or even just attack anywhere in the Labyrinth and then retreat before their enemy has a chance to counter. It is, by far, the most one-sided duel that we have ever seen in this entire franchise up to this point. This field, this Labyrinth field, benefits May and Q more thoroughly than anything else we've ever encountered. And because there's two of them, two opponents have to face them at the same time. And even though there are other characters here who can fight, Bakura can fight, and Anzu can fight, but they're not in the tournament. Yugi and Jinochi are, so they have to team up. And we've already had Honda earlier in these chapters calling out Jinochi for relying on luck so much, claiming that he might have even used up all of the luck for his entire lifetime. And even though the other Yugi insists to himself that that's not the case, that he believes that Jinochi relies on more than just luck. We don't know. We, as the audience, don't know if he is the weak link here. Mei and Q definitely seem to think he is, focusing on him over the other Yugi, because if one member of a team loses, both team members lose. I mentioned in the last review that Jinochi hadn't quite finished his arc. I think that by the time this story rolls around, he effectively has. He has a bit of a backslide at the start of the next major story arc, where he kind of has to undergo some aspects of his arc again to really solidify them. But I think at this point, he's effectively completed his story arc for this saga. But we'll get to that in a second. I want to explain the two facets of this specific duel. There's the duel itself, where the Labyrinth exists, hindering one side heavily without hindering the other side hardly at all. But there's also a riddle involved here, and it's really clever. I think it's one of the cleverest bits of writing I've ever encountered. And I'm just going to go ahead and spoil how this whole thing resolves, because I want to talk about the riddle first. And I want to talk about the whole thing here. It's that classic, you come to a crossroads and you know one way takes you to a bad place, one way takes you to a good place. There's a guy in the middle, and you have one question you can ask him, and if he's from the bad place, there's a specific question you can ask him where either way he'll take you to the good place. In this specific situation, there's two doors. Each of the Mayq brothers guards a door. One of them can only tell the truth, and one can only tell lies. What question do you ask them to reveal who is the truth teller and who's the liar, so that you can ask with your second question, because each opponent gets one question, which is the correct door. So in the case of that riddle, the correct question to ask the person at the crossroads is, which is your city? Because if they're from the bad city, the city of liars, they'll have to show you the good city, because they're a liar. And even in versions of this specific riddle, where there are two people standing at the crossroads, one from each of the two cities, just like the Mayq brothers each having a different door, that is still the answer. You ask them which is your city, and the liar will have to point to the others. Because that riddle is delivered by an omnipotent narrator. You're explained the context of the riddle, rather than the characters in the riddle telling it to you. And Jinochi, having heard a version of this riddle before, comes so close to solving the riddle, but he doesn't think quite deep enough. It's the other Yugi who thinks about it another way. He considers another layer to it, realizing that both of the Mayq brothers have made this assertion in the context of the riddle, because the context of the riddle is separate from the context of the duel. But in the context of the riddle, they have both said that one of them tells the truth and the other tells lies. And the only way they can both say that, if one of them is supposed to always lie, is if it's not true at all. And therefore they are both liars. Showing that the other Yugi is still further along. He's still more intelligent, more experienced, a better gamer than Jinochi is. But Jinochi came so close. It really lines up with what we see throughout the duel itself, that he's there. He's a true duelist now. The only real difference between him and the other Yugi is that he's a bit more prideful, and he doesn't have as much experience. He just has to work on those last couple of things, and eventually he could be just as great. And I really love the solution to this. The other Yugi works out a trick using coins, where he can effectively control which door he guessed after the Mayq brothers have already committed to one door being the correct one. It's so good. He outfoxes these seasoned liars whose only job is to sit here in this chamber and lie to players to keep them from getting further in this tournament than Pegasus wants them to. Because the Mayq brothers are, of course, more player killers in the same vein as Darkness. This is really the only place that the other Yugi gets to show up Jinochi, though, in these chapters, which is extremely cool. In the duel itself, this is really Jinochi's show. The other Yugi gets some cool moments, but this is a recurring thing whenever we see the other Yugi tag team with somebody else. That somebody else gets most of the turn-to-turn moments in their battle to really show their stuff, with the other Yugi only really swooping in to make the big plays, and that's what happens here. What's cool, though, is right from the start, and granted, the other Yugi is really good at reading body language, so he'd be able to pick up on the fact that Jinochi is more competent and more confident now than he's ever been. But right from the start of this duel, while the others are doubting Jinochi, the other Yugi never does. He is totally confident that Jinochi has his back, sending his creatures into the maze, expecting that Jinochi will have a way to protect them, going out of his way to reunite his monsters with Jinochi's while they're in the maze after they get separated, because he recognizes that they're stronger together. And in the end, even though the Labyrinth is a no-fly zone, which means monsters with big wings can't get through, he still finds a way to take advantage of Jinochi's Red Eyes Black Dragon, taking advantage of this ace that Jinochi won through his own talent and luck. After all, it is Jinochi's Red Eyes Black Dragon that he fuses his Summoned Skull with to create a monster big enough to challenge the opponent's Gate Guardian, which is a monster that can attack anywhere in the maze and is obscenely powerful. Going out of his way then to get another monster to the end of the maze and then switching its place with the Black Skull Dragon, bringing this symbol of his unified strength with Jinochi right up to the enemy, and then relying on Jinochi to use their own spell card against them to make the Black Skull Dragon strong enough to win. It is the ultimate show of the strength of these two characters, showing that they're both true duelists now. They're not quite equally powerful, but they're equally reliable. It's just so good to see after everything that Jinochi's been through. And even though I really like the anime-only duel between the other Yugi and Jinochi in the finals of this tournament, it's because of these chapters here that we don't actually need that duel. This works to serve the same purpose, to show that these characters are both very, very strong, and to show how much they, platonically at least, love each other and trust each other. It's just really freaking good. And with their victory over May and Q, they both have the 10 star chips they need to enter the castle. The preliminaries are over. They're in the finals. You know, barring any last second complications, of course. I love these chapters a lot. Between all of the really creative ways that Takahashi gave the Meikyu brothers to attack anywhere in the Labyrinth, that I'm not going to spoil here because I think you should go find these online or something and read them, these chapters. And the designs of their creatures and how interesting the Gate Guardian is, at least in the universe of the manga. It's not very powerful in the actual card game, unfortunately. And how well these two characters gelled when fighting together. These are some of my absolute favorites, and I'll just reread these for fun occasionally, even when I'm not doing a full reread of the series. They're really good. Even the dub version of the anime is really good, because the goodness of this particular story shines through so well. They're a highlight of the Duelist Kingdom story that brings both of these characters to exactly where they need to be for what comes next. And while there are some hang-ups later, while there are some setbacks later, prior to the finale, it really does feel like they've completed something, they've finished something. They've gotten somewhere by the time that this particular duel is over. Like a major step has been taken, like a new chapter has started. It's very satisfying, is my point. And that's why I think that this particular duel feels like the end of Jinochi's arc here. Like, there's a little bit of character stuff for him in his upcoming duel with Keith. But so far, Duelist Kingdom has mostly been a character study of Jinochi. The other Yugi has done stuff, but he hasn't really grown or changed. It's after this point that we get our development for Yugi, and the other Yugi by extension in this arc. It's at this moment that Jinochi stops being the main character of Duelist Kingdom, and Yugi takes over. And yet both characters are treated so well prior to this and after this that you don't even notice that the change happened. What do you guys think of these particular chapters containing the duel against the Labyrinth brothers, the Meikyu brothers, if you have read them? Let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video and share it with anyone else who think would enjoy my content. Subscribe if you haven't. And also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.